My name is Mira Voss, and I still have the letter that changed my life. It sits in my old storage locker, wrinkled and stained with engine grease, because I have read it so many times the edges are soft as cloth. It is a single line long. It says, Cadet Mira Voss, report to Krivax Academy for mandatory training. That is all. No explanation. No warning. Just an order, stamped and sealed, sent by a tired clerk at the Interstellar Cadet Placement Bureau, who was probably thinking about lunch instead of my future. I was 19 when it arrived. I lived on Corin Colony, a quiet mining world where the biggest excitement was a dust storm or a broken water pipe. I had applied to the Engineering Track Academy, hoping to fix ships instead of flying them into danger. I was not strong. I was not fast. I was, by every measure the galaxy used, unremarkable. So when my orders came, I assumed someone had simply made a mistake with the paperwork. I did not know how right I was, or how much that mistake would cost me, and give me, in the months that followed. I boarded the transport ship without asking questions, because questions took weeks to answer through the bureau, and my ticket was already stamped. I told myself I would sort it out when I arrived. I did not know that Krivax Academy was not a school. It was a proving ground for the fiercest species in known space, built for cadets who were born with claws, venom, or bodies made for war. Humans had never studied there. Not once, in the Academy's 300 years of history. I found this out the moment I stepped off the ship. The landing platform was built for giants. Every cadet around me stood at least 2 heads taller than I did, with skin like armor plating, or fur like storm clouds. They turned to look at me with an expression I would come to know very well over the following weeks. Confusion, followed by something close to amusement. One cadet, a broad-shouldered being with slate-gray scales, leaned toward his friend and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Is this a joke? Did the humans send us a mascot?" I did not answer. I was too busy trying not to shake. An instructor met us at the gate. She was tall, with eyes that missed nothing, and she looked at me the way you might look at a machine part that did not belong in the engine. She checked her list twice, frowning, and then said only, "Report to Barracks 7. Orientation begins at dawn." I do not think she believed I would survive orientation. Honestly, neither did I. That first night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of a species I did not understand, in a building that smelled like metal and something sharper underneath it, and I thought about going home. I thought about writing to the bureau and demanding they fix their mistake. But something in me, something stubborn that I did not know I had, decided to wait one more day before giving up. Just one more day. Orientation was a trial disguised as a lesson. We were dropped into a simulated wilderness and told to reach a marker before nightfall. No maps. No help. Just claws, muscle, and instinct for everyone else. And me. The other cadets ran. They tore through the underbrush with raw strength, using speed and power to force their way forward. I could not keep up with that. My legs were too short, my body too soft by their standards. So I did the only thing I know how to do well, I thought. I noticed the terrain sloped toward a dry riverbed, and riverbeds usually lead somewhere. I noticed the marker beacon pulsed on a certain frequency, and if I climbed a ridge, I could see the pulse reflect off a distant rock face, giving me a rough direction. I was slower than everyone else, but I was not lost. While the fastest cadets tired themselves out charging through thick brush, I walked the long way around, using the terrain instead of fighting it. I was not first to the marker, but I was not last either, and more importantly, I was one of the few who arrived without injury. The instructor who had frowned at me the day before looked at my muddy boots and said nothing, but I saw her write something down. Word spread quickly after that. Not that I was strong, because I clearly was not, but that I was strange. A human who solved problems instead of smashing them. Some cadets found this funny, others found it insulting, as if my presence mocked everything their culture valued. A group of them, led by the slate-scaled cadet from the landing platform, whose name I learned was Threk, began finding ways to make my life difficult. Extra obstacles during training, equipment that seemed to break only when I used it, small, sharp comments about mistakes and mascots. I will admit, there were nights I cried into my pillow, quietly, so my barrack mates would not hear. But I also noticed something important. Not every cadet at Krivax was like Threk. There were smaller cadets, weaker by their species standards, who were mocked the same way I was. A thin, quick-eyed being named Sella, from a species built for speed rather than power, often finished last in strength trials, and was rarely picked for team exercises. We started sitting together at meals, mostly because no one else wanted us at their table. One evening, I told her about the riverbed, about walking around the brush instead of through it. She listened carefully, and a few days later, during a team trial, she used a similar trick to slip past a stronger opponent instead of meeting them head-on. She won. It was a small thing, but I saw the pride on her face, and something in my chest loosened just a little. Word of my placement mistake finally reached the Academy's high command about a month in. I was called before a panel of senior instructors, including the Academy's director, a massive being whose voice rumbled like distant thunder. They confirmed what I had already suspected. A clerical error at the Bureau had sent me here by accident. I was meant for the engineering track, not for Krivax. You may return home, the director said. No record of failure will follow you. This was not your error to carry. I stood there, and for a moment, I almost said yes. Going home meant safety. It meant no more bruises, no more cold stares from cadets like Threk, no more nights of doubting myself. But then I thought of Sella, and the way her face had lit up when her strategy worked. I thought about the riverbed, and how I had found my own way through a place built for people stronger than me. I would like to stay, I said, if that is still possible. The director studied me for a long moment. I do not know what she saw. Maybe stubbornness, maybe curiosity. Whatever it was, she nodded once. Then you will need to prove your placement was not wasted. I decided right then that I would. Over the following weeks, I stopped trying to fight the way Krivax cadets fought. Instead, I leaned fully into what made me different. During defense drills, while others relied on raw power to block attacks, I studied patterns, learned to read an opponent's weight and balance, and used small movements to redirect force instead of meeting it. During endurance trials, when others burned out from pushing too hard too fast, I paced myself, drank water on a schedule, and often outlasted cadets twice my strength, simply because I did not run myself into exhaustion. Slowly, other cadets began asking me questions. Not the strongest ones, not Threk and his group, but the ones like Sella, the ones who had always struggled under a system built entirely around strength. I taught them what little I knew, how to plan instead of react, how to work as a team instead of competing for individual glory, how to use the terrain, the schedule, even their opponent's pride, as tools. Threk did not like this one bit. He saw it as an insult to everything Krivax stood for. One afternoon, he challenged me directly to a formal sparring match in front of the entire barracks, the kind of challenge that could not be refused without shame. I remember my hands trembling as I accepted, because I knew exactly what would happen if I tried to match his strength. So I did not. When the match began, Threk charged forward immediately, expecting me to either dodge in a straight line or try to block him directly, both of which would have ended badly for me. Instead, I stepped to the side at the last possible second, letting his own momentum carry him past me, and used a low sweep to unbalance him just enough that he stumbled. It was not a powerful move. It was not even a particularly skilled one, but it worked, because I had spent weeks studying exactly how he moved, exactly how he always led with his right side out of habit. He recovered quickly, of course, and the match continued for several more minutes, but the crowd had already stopped laughing. By the end, I had not defeated him through strength, and I want to be clear about that, because it would not have been true, but I had held my ground long enough and outmaneuvered him often enough that the match was called a draw. For a human cadet at Krivax Academy, a draw against one of the strongest fighters in our year was as good as a victory. The final test of that term was not a scheduled trial. It came without warning, during what should have been a routine field exercise near the Academy's outer boundary. A group of wild predators, larger and far more dangerous than anything we had trained against, broke through a weak point in the perimeter fencing during a storm. Cadets scattered, and for a moment, panic nearly took over. I do not remember deciding to take charge. It simply happened. I remembered the terrain from earlier scouting exercises, remembered where the ground dropped away into narrow gullies, that the larger predators would struggle to move through quickly. I shouted for cadets to fall back toward the gullies, to funnel into narrow paths instead of scattering across open ground, where individual strength meant nothing against numbers. Sella heard me first and followed. Others followed her. Even Threk, after a moment of hesitation, listened, because in that instant, being right mattered more than being proud. We moved as a group, using the narrow paths to limit how many predators could reach us at once, giving the instructors time to arrive with proper containment equipment. No cadet was seriously harmed. It could have gone very differently. Afterward, the director called me to her office again. This time, she did not mention the Bureau's mistake at all. "Your methods are unusual for this academy," she said, "but they are not wrong. Perhaps we have spent too long believing strength was the only path to survival." By the end of that year, Kryvak's Academy had quietly changed its training curriculum, adding lessons on strategy, teamwork, and adaptability alongside its traditional combat trials. I do not take full credit for that. Sella, and the other cadets who were never quite strong enough by Kryvak's old standards, deserve just as much credit as I do. We simply showed the Academy a different way to succeed, one that had always existed but had never been given a chance. I still do not know the name of the clerk who made that mistake at the Bureau. I like to imagine them sometimes, sitting at a desk somewhere, completely unaware that a single tired keystroke sent an ordinary human girl to the deadliest academy in the galaxy, and that she managed, somehow, to change it. I was never meant to be there, but I am glad, more than I can properly explain, that I was.